Some mistakes cost more than others. Damien Cole looked like any other customer walking into Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant on a Saturday night. Simple clothes, quiet demeanor, no flashy jewelry or expensive car waiting outside. To the staff, he was nobody special. They were wrong. What started as a simple dinner request was about to become the most expensive no in restaurant history. Because when you judge someone by their appearance, when you decide who deserves respect based on what you see, sometimes you discover that the quiet man in the corner booth has more power than you ever imagined. In this city of money and influence, appearances can be deadly, assumptions can destroy lives, and some people have resources that go far beyond what meets the eye. The staff thought they were protecting their exclusive atmosphere. They thought they were maintaining standards. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. Within 72 hours, everything would change. The restaurant, the careers of everyone involved, the very foundations of how business is done on the Upper East Side. Because when you humiliate the wrong person, the consequences don't just knock on your door. They own the building. Saturday evening in Manhattan always brought out the best and worst of the city. On the Upper East Side, where money flowed like water and status was measured in designer labels, Le Bernardin's newest sister restaurant, Azure, had become the place where New York's elite came to see and be seen. Damien Cole stood outside the restaurant for a moment, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as couples in expensive clothes laughed over champagne and businessmen sealed deals with handshakes worth millions. At 42, Damien had learned to read rooms before entering them. Tonight, this room screamed exclusivity. He pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The hostess, a young blonde woman with perfect makeup and a smile that looked practiced in the mirror, glanced up from her reservation book. Her eyes swept over Damien quickly. Dark jeans, simple button-down shirt, no designer labels visible. "Good evening," she said, her voice polite but cooler than it had been with the couple ahead of him. "Do you have a reservation?" "I don't, but I was hoping you might have a table for one," Damien replied, his voice calm and friendly. The hostess looked past him, as if expecting someone else to walk through the door. When no one did, she turned back to her book, flipping through pages she had already checked. "I'm sorry, but we're completely booked tonight," she said without looking up. "Perhaps you could try next week." Damien glanced around the restaurant. He could see at least 3 empty tables, and the dining room was only about 70% full. "Are you sure? I see some open tables." "Those are reserved," she said quickly. "We hold tables for our regular customers who might arrive without notice." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Damien had faced worse than this. "I understand. What about the bar? I'd be happy to eat there." The hostess hesitated, clearly not expecting him to be so persistent. "Well, I suppose I could check with the manager." She disappeared into the back, leaving Damien standing in the foyer. Other customers continued to arrive, all white, all obviously wealthy, all immediately seated without question about reservations. A young couple without a reservation was given a prime table by the window. An older man in an expensive suit was warmly greeted by name and shown to a corner booth. After 10 minutes, the hostess returned with a tall, thin man in his 50s wearing a perfectly pressed suit. The manager's smile was professional but didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Robert Fletcher, the general manager," he said, extending his hand. "I understand you're looking for a table." "That's right, just for one." Fletcher looked Damien up and down, taking in his simple clothes and lack of obvious wealth markers. "I have to be honest with you, sir. Our clientele tends to be particular about the dining atmosphere. We maintain certain standards that our regular customers expect." "I see. And what standards would those be?" "Well, we have a dress code, for one thing. Jacket required for gentlemen." Damien looked around the dining room again. At least 3 men were eating without jackets, including the man who had just been seated at the window table. "I noticed several gentlemen dining without jackets," Damien pointed out calmly. Fletcher's smile became more strained. "Those are regulars. We make exceptions for our established customers." "I understand. How does someone become an established customer?" "It takes time, references, the right connections." The message was clear. Damien didn't look like he belonged, and Fletcher wasn't going to let him stay long enough to prove otherwise. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the restaurants downtown," Fletcher suggested. "There are some excellent places in that area that might be more suitable." Downtown, code for where people like you belong. Damien had heard variations of this conversation his entire life, but it never stopped stinging. "Thank you for your time," Damien said simply. As he turned to leave, he heard Fletcher say to the hostess, "We need to be more careful about who we let through the door. The neighborhood is changing, and we can't let our standards slip." Damien walked out into the cool Manhattan evening, his mind already working. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. "Marcus? It's Damien. I need you to research a restaurant for me. Azure, on East 78th Street. I want to know who owns it, who owns the building, and what the ownership structure looks like." Marcus Washington had been Damien's lawyer and close friend for 15 years. He'd handled the legal side of building Damien's clean energy empire from a small solar panel installation company into a billion-dollar corporation. "Planning to invest in the restaurant business?" Marcus asked. "Something like that. How quickly can you get me that information?" "Give me an hour." Damien walked the streets of the Upper East Side while he waited, observing the world he'd been excluded from. Designer boutiques with price tags that would feed a family for months. Art galleries selling paintings worth more than most people's homes. A world where money was power, and power decided who belonged. His phone rang exactly 57 minutes later. "The restaurant is owned by Meridian Hospitality Group," Marcus said. "They operate 12 high-end restaurants across Manhattan. The building itself is owned by Sterling Property Management, which is part of a larger real estate investment trust called Metropolitan Holdings." "Who controls Metropolitan Holdings?" "It's publicly traded, but there are several major shareholders. The largest is Blackstone Capital Partners with about 30%. Second largest is Crane Investment Group with 22%. Damien smiled. Crane Investment Group was one of his regular business partners. They'd made a lot of money together on renewable energy projects. "What would it take to acquire a controlling interest in Metropolitan Holdings?" Damien asked. There was a pause on the other end. "Damien, what exactly are you planning?" "Research. What would it cost?" Metropolitan Holdings has a market cap of about $8 billion. To get a controlling interest, you'd need to acquire at least 25 to 30% of the outstanding shares. That's roughly $2 to $2.5 billion. And how long would that take? If you're serious about this, I could start making discrete purchases through shell companies on Monday morning. With the right strategy, we could have a controlling position within 60 to 90 days. Do it. "Damien, are you sure about this? That's a massive investment just because you didn't like a restaurant." Damien thought about Fletcher's condescending smile, about being told he didn't belong, about the casual racism dressed up as standards and dress codes. "Marcus, how much did we make on the Texas wind farm project last quarter?" "About $3 billion after taxes. Then I can afford to make a point. Start the acquisitions Monday morning." While Marcus was running the numbers, Damien had walked back toward Azure. The restaurant was still busy, with a line of well-dressed customers waiting for tables. He stood across the street, watching the flow of people in and out. Every customer was white. Every customer was obviously wealthy. Every customer was welcomed warmly and treated like royalty. It wasn't just about money. Plenty of black entrepreneurs and professionals could afford these prices. This was about something else entirely. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I ran some additional numbers. There's a faster way. The building Azure is in is separately owned by a subsidiary of Metropolitan Holdings. I could arrange to purchase that specific property within a week. Are you interested?" Damien typed back, "How much?" "The building is worth about $40 million. But here's the interesting part. Azure has a 5-year lease that comes up for renewal in 18 months. If we owned the building, we could choose not to renew. Buy it." "Damien, this is crazy. You're talking about spending $40 million because a restaurant was rude to you." Damien looked back at the restaurant, where Fletcher was now greeting another customer, a young white man in jeans and a t-shirt who was immediately seated without question about dress codes or standards. "No," Damien typed back. "I'm talking about spending $40 million to teach $40 million worth of people that actions have consequences." As he walked away from the restaurant, Damien felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not anger. He'd moved past anger long ago. This was something colder and more focused. This was the feeling he got when he identified a problem that needed solving. In the clean energy business, Damien had learned that the most efficient systems were often the simplest ones. Solar panels converted sunlight to electricity through basic physics. Wind turbines used air movement to generate power through straightforward mechanics. The most elegant solutions were usually the most direct ones. Tonight's problem was simple: a restaurant that discriminated against people based on their appearance. The solution would be equally simple: remove their ability to discriminate. But as Damien caught a taxi back to his penthouse apartment, He was already thinking bigger than just one restaurant. Marcus had mentioned that Meridian Hospitality Group operated 12 restaurants across Manhattan. If Azure was representative of their corporate culture, then the problem was bigger than just one location. And if the problem was bigger, then the solution needed to be bigger too. Sunday morning would bring newspaper business sections full of market reports and acquisition rumors. Monday morning would bring phone calls to investment banks and private equity firms. But tonight, Damian Cole went to sleep planning the kind of business deal that would make headlines for all the right reasons. In the restaurant industry, customer service was everything, reputation was everything, and reputation, once lost, was almost impossible to rebuild. Fletcher and his staff had no idea what they'd set in motion with their casual discrimination. They thought they were protecting their exclusive atmosphere. They thought they were maintaining standards. What they'd actually done was declare war on someone who had the resources to win it decisively. The only question now was how long it would take for them to realize they were fighting a battle they'd already lost. Monday morning arrived grey and cold in Manhattan, but Damian Cole was already 3 hours into his day. By 6 a.m., he was on a conference call with investment bankers in London. By 7 a.m., he was reviewing acquisition papers with Marcus Washington. By 8 a.m., he was making moves that would change everything. The building purchase is moving faster than expected, Marcus said, spreading documents across the conference table in Damian's downtown office. The current owners are a pension fund looking to liquidate real estate assets. They're motivated sellers. Damian's office was nothing like what people expected from a billionaire. Simple furniture, clean lines, and windows that looked out over the city he was about to reshape. The only luxury was the view, 40 floors above Manhattan. He could see everything from Central Park to the Hudson River. How fast can we close? Damian asked. With cash? We could have signed papers by Friday. Do it. Marcus hesitated. Damian, I have to ask again. Are you sure about this? $40 million for revenge seems. It's not revenge, Damian interrupted. It's a business decision. That restaurant represents everything wrong with how this city operates. If we can fix one problem, maybe we can fix others. And if we can't, Damian smiled, then we'll own a very expensive building in a very good neighborhood. While Marcus handled the legal paperwork, Damian turned his attention to the bigger picture. If he was going to make a statement, it needed to be the right statement. It needed to show that discrimination had consequences, but it also needed to create something positive. His phone buzzed with a call from Sarah Chen, his head of corporate development. I've been thinking about our conversation this weekend, she said. About expanding into hospitality. I think I found something interesting. I'm listening. There's a company called Meridian Hospitality Group. They run high-end restaurants across Manhattan. Their stock price has been flat for 2 years, and their customer satisfaction ratings are dropping. They might be ripe for acquisition. Damian had to smile. Sarah didn't know about Saturday night, but she'd just identified the exact company he was planning to target. What would it take to acquire them? They're privately held, but I think they'd be open to offers. The restaurant business is tough right now. A lot of these high-end places are struggling to maintain their customer base. Set up a meeting with their leadership team. This week if possible. Really? You want to get into restaurants? I want to get into the business of doing business better. By Tuesday afternoon, the meeting was scheduled. Meridian Hospitality Group CEO James Morrison was eager to meet with Damian. A potential investment from Cole Clean Energy would solve a lot of problems for their struggling restaurant chain. The meeting was set for Thursday morning at Morrison's office in Midtown, but Damian had other plans for Wednesday night. I want to go back to the restaurant, he told Marcus on Wednesday afternoon. Why? You're about to own the building. You could just kick them out. I want to see if anything has changed. If they treat me differently now that they've had time to think about it. And if they don't, then I'll know for sure that the problem isn't just one bad night. It's systematic. Wednesday evening, Damian drove himself to Azure in a rental car instead of his usual driver. He wore the same simple clothes as Saturday night, dark jeans, button-down shirt, no obvious signs of wealth. The hostess was different this time, a brunette woman in her 20s who smiled genuinely when he walked in. Good evening, she said warmly. Table for one, please. Right this way. She led him to a small table near the kitchen. Not the worst seat in the house, but not the best either. Damian sat down and looked around. The restaurant was about half full, with plenty of good tables available. The waiter who approached his table was young, probably fresh out of college, trying to work his way up in the restaurant business. Good evening, sir. Can I start you with something to drink? I'll have a glass of your best red wine, Damien said. Whatever you recommend. The waiter looked uncomfortable. Sir, our wine list is quite extensive, and some of our selections are rather expensive. Perhaps I could suggest something in a more moderate price range. Here it was again, the assumption that he couldn't afford the good stuff. What's your most expensive bottle? Damien asked. We have a 1,980, 2 Bordeaux for $1,200. I'll take a glass of that. The waiter's eyes widened. Sir, that's $60 per glass. I understand. I'd also like to see a menu. The waiter hurried away, and Damien watched him go straight to Fletcher, the manager from Saturday Night. They had a whispered conversation, with Fletcher glancing over at Damien several times. Fletcher approached the table with the same practiced smile as before. Good evening, sir. I understand you're interested in our premium wine selection. That's right. May I ask, are you celebrating something special tonight? It's just that we like to ensure our guests are fully informed about our pricing. I'm celebrating being able to afford what I want to drink. Fletcher's smile became more strained. Of course, sir. It's just that we've had some misunderstandings in the past. Customers who weren't prepared for our price points. Are you asking if I can pay my bill? Not at all, sir. We just want to make sure you have a pleasant dining experience. Damien pulled out his wallet and placed a black American Express Centurion card on the table. The card was made of titanium and had no preset spending limit. Only people with proven assets of at least $10 million could qualify for one. Fletcher stared at the card for a moment, clearly recognizing what it was. I see, Fletcher said, his tone changing slightly. Well, let me personally ensure that you receive excellent service tonight. The wine arrived quickly, poured with great ceremony by Fletcher himself. The menu was presented with detailed explanations of each dish. The waiter checked on him frequently, asking if everything was to his satisfaction. But Damien noticed other things too. The couple at the next table, also without reservation, had been seated immediately at a prime window table. A group of young professionals had been welcomed warmly and given the restaurant's best booth. Every other customer was white. When the check arrived, it totaled $340 for dinner and wine. Damien left a $100 tip and paid with the black card. As he was leaving, Fletcher approached him again. I hope you enjoyed your evening, Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, please don't hesitate to call if you'd like to make a reservation in the future. We'd be happy to accommodate a customer of your caliber. Damien smiled. I'll keep that in mind. Outside the restaurant, Damien felt the same cold anger as Saturday night. The only difference tonight was the black card. The same man, the same clothes, the same polite behavior, but now he was welcome because he'd proven he had money. It wasn't about whether he could afford to eat there. It had never been about that. It was about making assumptions based on how he looked, about deciding who belonged before they even opened their mouths. His phone rang as he walked to his car. How did it go? Marcus asked. Exactly as expected. They treated me like royalty once they saw the credit card. So the problem is solved? No, the problem is worse than I thought. They don't see people as people. They see credit scores and clothes and skin color. They make decisions about human worth based on all the wrong things. And that's worth $40 million to fix? Damien got into his car and started the engine. Marcus, how much did we spend on the wind farm in California? About $2 billion. And how many people does that project employ? Directly? About 500. Indirectly, maybe 2,000. So we spent $2 billion to create 2,000 jobs and generate clean energy. Now I want to spend $40 million to create a different kind of change, to show that discrimination has consequences. And after you own the building, what then? Damien had been thinking about that question since Sunday night. Then we do something better. We create the kind of restaurant that judges people by who they are, not what they look like. Thursday morning, Damien walked into the offices of Meridian Hospitality Group, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and carrying a briefcase full of documents that would change everything. James Morrison was exactly what Damien expected. Mid-50s, expensive suit, firm handshake, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Mr. Cole, this is an honor, Morrison said, gesturing to a conference room with windows overlooking Central Park. When I heard that Cole Clean Energy was interested in diversifying into hospitality, I knew we had to meet. I appreciate you taking the time, Damien said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. So tell me, what interests you about the restaurant business? Customer service, Damien said simply. I'm fascinated by businesses that succeed or fail based on how they treat people. Morrison smiled. That's exactly our philosophy at Meridian. We pride ourselves on providing exceptional service to discerning customers. Discerning customers? Well, our restaurants cater to a very specific clientele: successful professionals, established families, people who appreciate quality and exclusivity. I see. And how do you maintain that exclusivity? Morrison leaned forward, thinking he was sharing trade secrets with a potential investor. It's all about setting the right tone from the moment customers walk in. Our staff are trained to recognize the type of customer who fits our brand image. We maintain certain standards that keep our restaurants feeling special. What kind of standards? Dress codes, reservation policies, things like that. We've found that when you're too flexible with your standards, the wrong kind of people start showing up. It dilutes the experience for our target customers. Damien nodded thoughtfully. And these standards apply to all your restaurants? Absolutely. We have 12 locations across Manhattan, and they all follow the same protocols. Consistency is key to building a premium brand. I'd like to visit some of your locations, get a feel for the customer experience. Of course, I'll arrange VIP tours of our flagship restaurants. You'll see exactly what we're building here. Damien smiled. I think I already have a pretty good idea. The meeting continued for another hour, with Morrison explaining their business model, profit margins, and expansion plans. By the end, he was practically begging Damien to invest. We're looking for the right strategic partner, Morrison said as they shook hands. Someone who understands quality and has the resources to help us grow. I'll be in touch very soon, Damien promised. That afternoon, Damien called Marcus from his car. Change of plans, he said. I don't want to just buy the building. I want to buy the whole company. Meridian Hospitality Group. All of it. Every restaurant, every contract, every employee. That's going to cost significantly more than $40 million. How much more? Based on their revenue numbers and market position, probably somewhere between 200 and 300 million. Do it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Damien, you're talking about spending $250 million because one restaurant was rude to you. No, Damien said, watching the city pass by his window. I'm talking about spending $250 million to prove that character matters more than credit cards. That dignity isn't for sale, and that when you build a business on discrimination, someone with bigger resources might decide to build something better. And what happens to all the employees, the waiters and cooks and managers? That depends on how they treat people. The ones who judge customers by their humanity instead of their bank accounts will do just fine. The others. Damien paused. The others will learn that there are consequences for making people feel small. Friday afternoon, the building purchase was finalized. By Monday morning, Damien would own the property that housed Azure Restaurant, but that was just the beginning. By the end of the month, he would own the entire company that operated 12 of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, and then he would begin the most expensive lesson in customer service that New York had ever seen. 3 weeks later, James Morrison was having the worst Monday of his life. He sat in his office at 7 a.m., staring at documents that his lawyers had delivered an hour earlier. The papers were thick, formal, and completely devastating. Someone had just purchased Meridian Hospitality Group. All of it. Every restaurant, every contract, every debt. The buyer was Cold Clean Energy Corporation. Morrison's hands shook as he read through the acquisition details. The purchase price was $280 million, paid in cash, with the sale effective immediately. He'd been looking for investors for months, but this wasn't an investment. This was a complete buyout. His phone rang. His assistant's voice was nervous. Mr. Morrison, there's a Mr. Cole here to see you. He says he's the new owner. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Send him in. Damien Cole walked into the office wearing the same simple clothes Morrison remembered from their meeting 3 weeks ago. But everything about the situation was different now. Morrison was no longer the successful CEO courting an investor. He was an employee meeting his new boss. Good morning, James, Damien said, taking a seat across from Morrison's desk. I hope you've had a chance to review the paperwork. Yes, I have. Morrison's voice was barely steady. I have to say, this is quite a surprise. When we met, you seemed interested in a partnership. I was interested in understanding your business model. Now I understand it perfectly. Damien placed a folder on Morrison's desk. These are customer complaints from your 12 restaurants over the past 2 years. Would you like to guess what the most common complaint is? Morrison opened the folder with trembling hands. Page after page of complaints, all with the same theme: customers being treated differently based on their appearance, people being denied tables, given poor service, or made to feel unwelcome. Discrimination, Morrison said quietly. Discrimination, Damien confirmed. Systematic, intentional discrimination disguised as maintaining standards. You built a business on making people feel small. Mr. Cole, if this is about our conversation, I can explain. It's not about our conversation, Damien interrupted. It's about your business practices. It's about training your staff to judge people by their clothes instead of their character. Morrison was sweating now. What do you plan to do? Damien stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to fix a broken system. And my position? Terminated. Effective immediately. Morrison felt the words hit him like a physical blow. You can't just fire me. I have a contract. Your contract had a change of ownership clause. I invoked it an hour ago. Damien turned back to face Morrison. You'll receive your severance package, minus the damages we're claiming for discriminatory business practices. Damages? We're facing 17 potential lawsuits from customers who were discriminated against at your restaurants. Your policies created those liabilities. You'll be personally responsible for defending them. Morrison's face went white. Discrimination lawsuits could destroy him financially and professionally. This is insane. You're ruining my life over a misunderstanding. I'm holding you accountable for your choices, Damien said calmly. You chose to build a business that excluded people. Now you get to live with the consequences. After Morrison was escorted from the building, Damien called a meeting with the management staff from all 12 restaurants. They gathered in the Meridian conference room, 35 managers and assistant managers who suddenly found themselves working for a very different kind of boss. Robert Fletcher from Azure sat in the back row, clearly uncomfortable. He recognized Damien from their encounters at the restaurant, and the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. My name is Damien Cole. Damien began, standing at the front of the room. As of this morning, I own this company. I want to be very clear about something. Everything is about to change. The room was dead silent. Over the next month, I'll be visiting each restaurant personally. I'll be observing how you treat customers, how you make decisions about service, and how you represent this company's values. Fletcher shifted nervously in his seat. Some of you will keep your jobs. Some of you won't. The determining factor will be simple. Do you treat all customers with respect, or do you judge people based on their appearance? A manager from the Upper West Side location raised her hand. Mr. Cole, what if customers can't afford our prices? We can't serve people who can't pay. Everyone who walks through your doors can afford to be treated with dignity, Damien replied. If they order food and pay their bill, their income is none of your business. If they can't afford the prices, you politely explain the cost and let them make their own decisions. Another manager spoke up. But what about our atmosphere? Our regular customers expect a certain level of exclusivity. Your regular customers should expect excellent food and outstanding service. If they're expecting something else, they can find it somewhere else. Fletcher finally found his voice. Mr. Cole, I think there might be some misunderstanding about our policies. We don't discriminate. We simply maintain certain standards. Mr. Fletcher, Damien interrupted, I've eaten at your restaurant, twice. The first time, you refused to seat me and suggested I'd be more comfortable elsewhere. The second time, you treated me like royalty after seeing my credit card. Which version was the real you? Fletcher's face turned red. Several other managers were staring at him now, realizing that their new boss had experienced their discrimination firsthand. We were just following company policy. Company policy is changing. Starting today, every customer gets the same level of service. Every customer is treated with respect. Every customer is given the benefit of the doubt. Anyone who can't do that will be replaced by someone who can. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with Damien explaining his vision for the restaurants: quality food, excellent service, and equal treatment for all customers. It wasn't complicated, but for managers used to judging people by their clothes and credit cards, it would require a complete change in thinking. After the meeting, Fletcher approached Damien privately. Mr. Cole, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding during your visits to Azure. If I knew who you were, if you knew who I was, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the problem. Damien looked Fletcher in the eye. You shouldn't need to know someone's net worth to treat them with basic respect. I understand that now. Please, give me a chance to prove I can change. Damien considered this, Fletcher was clearly a product of the system Morrison had created, but he seemed genuinely remorseful. "You'll get your chance, but not at Azure." "Sir? Azure is closing permanently next week. I'm converting that space into something else." Fletcher went pale. "What about the staff, the waiters and cooks who work there? The ones who treated customers well will be transferred to other locations. The ones who didn't." Damien paused. "They'll have to find employment elsewhere." That afternoon, Damien walked through Azure one last time. The lunch crowd was typical for a Tuesday: wealthy professionals, business meetings, couples who could afford $50 entrees. None of them had any idea that they were eating in a restaurant that would be closed by the weekend. He watched the staff work, noting how they interacted with different customers. The young waiter, who had been nervous about his wine order, was attentive to everyone. The hostess, who had first turned him away, was still seating customers based on their appearance, giving prime tables to well-dressed patrons and corner tables to anyone who looked less affluent. After an hour of observation, Damien had made his decisions. Wednesday morning, he called individual meetings with every Azure employee. The young waiter, David, was first. "You're being transferred to our Midtown location," Damien told him. "It's our busiest restaurant, and good servers are always needed there." David looked confused. "Sir, what happened to Azure?" "Azure is closing. We're converting the space for a different use." "May I ask why?" Damien studied the young man's face. David had treated him well both times he'd visited, never making assumptions about his ability to pay or his right to be there. "Because some restaurants judge people by their wallets instead of their character. We're going to build something better." The hostess, who had originally turned him away, was less fortunate. "Your employment is being terminated," Damien told her simply. "But why? I've worked here for 2 years. My performance reviews have always been excellent." "Your performance reviews measured the wrong things. You turned away customers based on their appearance. You made assumptions about people's worth based on their clothes. I was just following company policy. Company policy was wrong, and you enforced it enthusiastically." By Thursday, word was spreading through New York's restaurant industry. Damien Cole had bought Meridian Hospitality Group and was firing managers for discrimination. Some people called it corporate overreach. Others called it long overdue justice. The New York Times restaurant critic wrote a piece titled, "When Customer Service Becomes Customer Justice." The article detailed complaints against Meridian restaurants and praised the new ownership for addressing systematic problems. But Damien wasn't interested in media attention. He was interested in results. Friday afternoon, he stood in the empty Azure dining room with Marcus and Sarah Chen, planning the space's transformation. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. "Another restaurant?" "Not exactly." Damien walked to the windows that looked out on East 78th Street. "I want to create something that shows how hospitality should work." "A training center?" Marcus suggested. "A restaurant that operates on different principles: high-quality food at reasonable prices, staff who are trained to see customers as human beings, not dollar signs. A place that proves you can maintain excellence without exclusion." Sarah was taking notes. "What's the target market?" "Everyone. That's the point. Teachers and bankers, students and retirees, tourists and locals. If you're hungry and willing to pay for your meal, you're welcome." "And the current staff from Azure? The ones who treated people well will have jobs at other locations. The ones who didn't." Damien paused. "They'll have to learn that their attitudes have consequences." Monday morning would bring more changes. More managers would be fired. More policies would be rewritten. The restaurant industry in Manhattan was about to learn that discrimination was expensive and that treating people poorly could cost more than anyone had imagined. But for now, Damien stood in the empty restaurant where he'd been humiliated 3 weeks earlier, planning something that would honor every person who had ever been made to feel small by someone who thought wealth determined worth. The old Azure had judged people by their credit cards. The new space would judge them by their humanity. And that, Damien thought, would make all the difference. 6 months later, Damien Cole stood in front of a restaurant that no one in Manhattan had ever seen before. The space that had once been Azure was now called Common Ground. The exterior looked elegant but welcoming, with large windows that let people see inside, and a simple sign that read, "Good food, good people, good prices." The transformation had taken longer than expected, but the result was exactly what Damien had envisioned. Inside, the restaurant felt warm and inclusive. The tables were well spaced and comfortable. The lighting was soft but bright enough to read a menu easily, and the entire atmosphere said, "Everyone belongs here." Tonight was opening night, and the crowd outside was unlike anything the Upper East Side had ever seen. There was Maria Santos, a schoolteacher from the Bronx, who had driven 40 minutes to try the restaurant she'd read about in the papers. Next to her stood Dr. Richard Phillips, a surgeon from Mount Sinai Hospital, waiting patiently in the same line. Behind them, a young couple, clearly on a budget, chatted excitedly with an elderly man in an expensive suit about the menu they'd all studied online. "This is remarkable," Marcus Washington said, standing beside Damien on the sidewalk. "Look at this crowd. Have you ever seen anything like this on the Upper East Side?" Damien smiled. The line stretched around the block, and every face was different. Different ages, different ethnicities, different income levels. All of them united by the simple desire for a good meal in a place that would treat them well. "Let's go inside," Damien said. The hostess who greeted them was Carmen Rodriguez, a former waitress from one of Damien's other restaurants who had shown exceptional kindness to all customers. She'd been promoted to head hostess at Common Ground and trained personally by Damien on the restaurant's philosophy. "Good evening, Mr. Cole," she said warmly. "Your usual table? Actually, I'd like to walk around a bit first, see how everything is going." Carmen smiled. "Everything is perfect, just like you said it would be." Damien moved through the restaurant, observing the controlled chaos of opening night. In the kitchen, Chef Antoine Dubois, formerly of a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in Paris, was preparing dishes that would have cost $60 elsewhere for $25 here. The quality was identical, but the markup was fair instead of exploitative. At table 12, he saw the schoolteacher Maria Santos looking at her menu with wide eyes. "Excuse me," Damien said, approaching her table. "How are you finding everything?" "It's incredible," Maria said. "I teach 5th grade, and I was telling my students about this place. They couldn't believe that someone would open a fancy restaurant where teachers could afford to eat." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that sometimes good people do good things, and we should never stop believing that's possible." Damien felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with profit margins or business success. "I hope you enjoy your dinner." At table 8, Dr. Phillips was having wine with a man Damien didn't recognize. "This is my brother," Dr. Phillips explained when Damien stopped by. "He's a mechanic in Queens. We never had a place we could both enjoy together, either too expensive for him or too casual for me. This is perfect." "That's exactly what we were hoping for," Damien said. As he continued through the restaurant, Damien saw the vision he'd had 6 months ago coming to life. Conversations between strangers, families celebrating special occasions they could actually afford, first dates where both people could relax about the cost. The young couple near the window caught his attention. They were clearly nervous, dressed in their best clothes but still looking around like they weren't sure they belonged. "How is everything?" Damien asked them. "Amazing," the young woman said. "We're celebrating our engagement, and this is the first nice restaurant we've been to where we didn't have to worry about the prices. We were going to go to that place Azure that used to be here," her fiancé added, "but they made us feel like we weren't good enough. This place makes us feel like we are." Damien smiled. "Congratulations on your engagement." In the kitchen, he found Chef Dubois plating dishes with the same precision he'd used at his previous high-end restaurants. "How are you adjusting, Antoine?" "Better than I expected," the chef said, adding a final garnish to a plate. "At my last restaurant, we served maybe 80 people per night, all very wealthy. Here, we serve 200 people per night, all very different. The energy is incredible." "Any regrets about leaving the Michelin star world?" Chef Dubois paused. "You know what I realized? Good food is good food. It doesn't matter if the person eating it makes minimum wage or millions of dollars. If anything, cooking for people who truly appreciate it is more rewarding than cooking for people who expect it." At 9 p.m., Damien received a call that made his evening complete. "Mr. Cole?" It was David, the young waiter he transferred from Azure to the Midtown location. "I'm calling from Meridian Midtown. You need to know something." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. That's why I'm calling. Tonight was our best night ever. Every table filled, customers happy, staff working together. And sir, 3 of our customers specifically mentioned that they chose us because they'd heard about what you did at Azure." "What do you mean?" "Word is getting around. People are saying that your restaurants treat everyone fairly. We're getting customers who used to avoid high-end places because they were tired of being judged." Damien hung up the phone and looked around Common Ground again. The restaurant was still full at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night, with a 2-hour wait for tables. But more importantly, it was full of people who felt welcome. At 10 p.m., As the dinner rush was winding down, Damien noticed a familiar face at the bar. Robert Fletcher, his former manager from Azure, was sitting alone with a drink. "Mr. Fletcher," Damien said, approaching him, "I didn't expect to see you here." Fletcher looked up, clearly embarrassed. "Mr. Cole, I wanted to see what you'd built. And what do you think?" "I think I was an idiot." Fletcher stared into his drink. "I've been out of work for 6 months. No one in the restaurant industry will hire me. Word gets around fast about why people get fired. I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not. And you shouldn't be." Fletcher looked up at Damien. "I spent 2 years making people feel unwelcome in their own city. I thought I was maintaining standards, but I was just being cruel. What will you do now?" "I don't know. Maybe leave the restaurant business entirely. Start over somewhere else." Fletcher paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you do all this? You could have just never come back to Azure. You could have eaten anywhere else in the city. Why spend hundreds of millions of dollars to prove a point?" Damien considered the question. "Because some points are worth proving. Because every time someone is made to feel small, it makes all of us smaller. Because I had the power to change something wrong, and that comes with responsibility to actually change it. And was it worth it?" Damien looked around the restaurant. At table 6, a grandmother was celebrating her birthday with 3 generations of her family. At table 15, 2 business partners were closing a deal over dessert. At the bar, a group of nurses from the local hospital were unwinding after a long shift. "Ask me in a year," Damien said. "But so far, yes." Fletcher finished his drink and stood up. "For what it's worth, I understand now. And I'm sorry." "I know you are." After Fletcher left, Damien stayed until closing time, watching his staff clean up after the most successful opening night in recent New York restaurant history. Carmen approached him as the last customers were leaving. "Mr. Cole, the final numbers are in. We served 347 customers tonight. Average ticket was 32. Customer satisfaction surveys are 98% positive. And the staff? Everyone is exhausted but happy. Tips were excellent, and 3 customers asked for our hiring manager's contact information because they want to apply for jobs here." Damien smiled. "Good. That means we're attracting the right kind of people to work here." Over the following months, Common Ground became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol. Food critics wrote about it. Business schools studied it. Other restaurant owners visited to understand how it achieved both profitability and inclusivity. But for Damien, the real measure of success came in smaller moments. Like the time he saw 2 former Azure customers arguing at table 9, not about the bill, but about who would pay it, because they both wanted to treat their friend to a nice dinner they could actually afford. Or the evening when a group of college students celebrated a graduation with a dinner that would have cost $400 elsewhere but cost them $120 at Common Ground, allowing them to tip generously and still stay within their budget. Or the afternoon when he overheard an elderly couple telling their waiter that this was the first time in 20 years they'd been able to afford to eat out for their anniversary. 1 year after opening, Common Ground had inspired 17 similar restaurants across the country. Other business owners had seen the success of Damien's model and decided to replicate it in their own cities. The entire Meridian Hospitality Group had been transformed. All 12 restaurants now operated under the same principles: excellent food, fair prices, equal treatment for all customers. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, and profits were actually better than before because of increased volume and positive word of mouth. James Morrison, the former CEO, had left the restaurant industry entirely after no other hospitality company would hire him. The discrimination lawsuits had cost him most of his savings, and he'd been forced to sell his Manhattan apartment. But the real change wasn't in the business metrics, it was in the culture. David, the young waiter, had been promoted to assistant manager at Meridian Midtown and was studying business administration at night school, with tuition assistance from Damien's company. Carmen Rodriguez had become head of training for all Meridian restaurants, teaching other staff members how to create welcoming environments for all customers. Chef Dubois had opened a second Common Ground location in Brooklyn and was training other chefs in his approach to high-quality, accessible dining. On the 2nd anniversary of Common Ground's opening, Damien stood once again in the restaurant that had changed everything. The space was full, as always, with the diverse crowd that had become its signature. Marcus joined him at the bar, where they could observe the controlled chaos of another successful dinner service. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked. "About what?" "Spending $280 million to teach a restaurant manager a lesson." Damien laughed. I didn't spend 280 million to teach Fletcher a lesson. I spent 280 million to prove that business can be both profitable and ethical. That success doesn't require exclusion. That treating people well is always the right choice, even when it costs more. And the lesson for Fletcher? The lesson for Fletcher was free. He just had to be willing to learn it. On the wall behind the bar, framed in simple black wood, hung the mission statement that Damien had written on opening day. We believe that good food should be accessible to good people. We believe that service should be measured by kindness, not credit scores. We believe that a restaurant should make people feel better about themselves, not worse. We believe that everyone deserves a place at the table. Below it, in smaller text, was a single line that captured everything Damien had learned from his experience. Not everyone can afford expensive food, but everyone can afford to be treated with dignity. As Damien watched his staff serve customers who came from every corner of New York City, who represented every income level and background, who all felt welcome in a space that judged them only by their humanity, he knew that the most expensive meal he'd never been served had led to the most valuable lesson he'd ever learned. Sometimes the best way to change the world isn't to tear down what's wrong. Sometimes it's to build something so obviously right that people can't help but notice the difference. And sometimes, when someone judges you by your appearance instead of your character, the best response isn't anger or revenge. It's proving them wrong by being better than they ever imagined possible. The end? A story about dignity, justice, and the power of building something better instead of just tearing down what's wrong. Because the most lasting change comes not from punishment, but from proving that there's a better way to treat people, and that treating people well is always good business.